when we started having our discussions about this, and that is complacency. And complacency can be a very dangerous thing when you're talking about storms. But rather than just our stories, we thought it would be a good idea to try to put together something like this so that you could hear directly from people who know what they're really talking about when it comes to hurricane preparedness, and who are really invested in your knowing as much as possible if a storm approaches. So we decided to go ahead and put together this forum, which, by the way, is being live streamed to all 16 newspaper sites for Gannett, USA Today, Florida Network throughout the state at the same time you guys are sitting here. So please be on your best behavior. And let me also go ahead and real quick thank our sponsors, Florida Power and Light, Florida Window and Doors, and of course, Palm Beach State College, which is our host facility here. So that said, I wanted to invite up Abby Ross from Palm Beach State to come and say a couple of words and welcome you as well.
Good evening, and thank you all so much for being here, and thank you to our, pardon me? Oh, thank you. And thank you to our esteemed panelists. Forgive me, my back to you. We just wanted to say thank you all for coming, and we're proud to be hosts of this event, and thank you to all of our sponsors as well. We also want to just thank Director Guthrie and again, all of our VIPs and esteemed panelists here. Right here in our public safety complex, for those of you who haven't been here before, this is where we train our first responders, many of whom largely stay in our community, our EMS, EMT, firefighters, police, all kinds of criminal justice folks, including our police dispatchers, and so on and so forth. So it's really important work that we do here. We're really proud of the work we do. We're very proud of the folks that we train. And again, most people, we say, if you encounter someone in police, fire, or EMS, which of course, hopefully you don't, because those are usually emergencies that none of us want to have, you will likely encounter someone who graduated from Palm Beach State College. So please, feel free to reach out to us if ever you want a tour, want to know more information about what we do and the product that comes out of here, because we're very proud of it. So I think that's all I wanted to say, but we just want to really reiterate the message of disaster preparedness and how important it is. And it comes in so many forms. It's not just hurricanes, as we all know. We've seen tornadoes throughout our state at higher rates than I think any of us ever thought could possibly happen in Florida, and so many other issues like flooding, especially as we enter our rainy season. So just take heed of the warnings and information, and we're really grateful for all of you being here. And again, thank you to our panelists.
Thank you, Abby. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists real quick so Kim can go ahead and do her thing. I'm going to go from left to right. But first, Tommy Strowd, trying to read without my glasses here, Executive Director and Engineer of the Lake Worth Drainage District. Hold your applause until I'm all done. And I'm sorry, Jamie Molnar, Executive Director of Emergency Preparedness for Florida Power and Light. Mary Blakeney, Director of, she's got a long title, Director of Palm Beach County Public Safety Department's Division of Emergency Management. Bryan Norcross, who really doesn't need any introduction, but Fox Weather's a hurricane specialist, but most notably, someone who guided most of South Florida through Hurricane Andrew. Thanks for being here, Bryan. And Kevin Guthrie, Executive Director of the Florida Division of Emergency Management. Thank you for being here too. And of course, our moderator, Kimberly Miller, weather reporter extraordinaire for the Palm Beach Post and the USA Today Network, Florida. Kim, take it away.
I've just got a short spiel here. Who was here during the 2004-2005 hurricane seasons? Okay, so we've got quite a few veterans, hurricane veterans in the audience. Almost every part of the state was impacted that year. Interestingly enough, Palm Beach County has not had a landfalling hurricane since David in 1979. But what 2004 and 2005 taught us is that you don't need to have a landfalling storm to be impacted. After those 2 years, I remember hearing people say, well, no one dies in hurricanes anymore. We've got impact glass, we've got Hurricane Andrew buildings, we've got iPhones in our pocket that can tell us to the minute almost when it's going to rain in our backyard. We have social media informing us, the font of all wisdom, Facebook. We also didn't have any hurricanes for 10 years. And then they came back with a vengeance, right? 2016, we had Hermine. 2017, Irma. 2018, Category 5, Michael. 2019, Dorian. It didn't hit us, but came really close. Very uncomfortable. 2022, Ian, and 2023, Idalia. And people did die, 150 in Ian. So that's one of the reasons we're here today. We hear it's going to be a busy hurricane season, 30 named storms possibly. That's double the average. But we have our experts, and we don't need to be scared because we just need to listen to what they say. So we're just going to get started. I'm going to ask questions. We're going to have a great panel discussion. If you guys have questions, if you wrote them down, my editor, Antonio, is right here. He's going to pick up the cards, or we'll get you a microphone if you didn't write it down. And we're going to talk about the mother of all low-pressure systems, hurricanes, which are just a fact of life in Florida. Bryan, I just wanted to start with you quickly. If you guys have not read Bryan's book about Hurricane Andrew, it is such a fascinating read into what was going on behind the scenes in August 1992. But we want to know what's going on right now in the atmosphere that's making it such a hyperactive forecast. And if you've ever seen something like this before, this kind of setup.
So thanks, Kim. Thanks for everybody for having me here. Really appreciate it. It's good to see you all. So first of all, let me just say about this forecast of 25, 30 storms. You hear all these big numbers this year. It's a great thing because, boy, are a lot of people interested in actually talking about hurricanes early in the season and not waiting until there's actually a threat. So, on one hand, that is a good thing, the fact that there is all this energy out there talking about it. So what is causing these forecasts to be like this? And the answer to your question, Kim, is the weather pattern, especially the oceanographic pattern, where the hot water is, the warm water, extremely warm water, record warm water in the Atlantic, is unprecedented. We have never seen both the pattern and the degree of warmth in the Atlantic. We saw the pattern last year, but it was, in spite of the fact it was record warm last year, it is even warmer this year. Warm water means energy for hurricanes. In the Pacific, you have El Nino and La Nina, and anybody that follows hurricanes have heard those words. Just think of El Nino as being negative for the development of strong storms. La Nina is usually positive or conducive for the development of storms. Last year we had an El Nino. That kept the storms out of the Caribbean. There were no storms in the Caribbean last year. Kept the Gulf almost storm-free, although we did have Idalia, and kept them away from Florida. This kind of persistent upper-level wind pushing from west to east did both things, kind of cut off the storms in the western part of the Atlantic basin, and it turned storms north. We don't have that this year. We have the opposite this year. So this year we have a very conducive Atlantic and a conducive Pacific, and that's why the numbers are higher. So yes, we've had a conducive both before, but we've never had this extreme situation in the Atlantic. Now, right now, obviously here we are into June and nothing is developing, and nothing's going to develop anytime soon here right away. Maybe later in the month it becomes a little more conducive. The weather pattern is really unusual in that everything is pushed way far south. So we actually had a cold front come through here some days ago. If you notice, the humidity dropped. It's kind of back up now, but the humidity dropped. It was really beautiful. That was actually a cold front in June. Really unusual. So cold fronts are coming farther south. The tropical activity is pushed way south, and so it just hasn't kicked in yet. But what happens in June has essentially nothing to do with what happens in August, September, and October. Every expectation continues to be that it will be a busy hurricane season once the tropics get into regular mode because they have more energy to make storms stronger, either develop where they wouldn't have developed with normal water temperatures or get stronger.
So you're talking about water, and we know that storm surge and even now freshwater flooding is one of the biggest killers, storm surge and then freshwater flooding, because the storms are carrying so much more rain. Tommy is in charge of keeping us dry at the Lake Worth Drainage District. And one thing that Ken Graham, the Hurricane Center director, used to say is, never say it's just a Category 1 or it's just a tropical storm. And in your packets, if you picked one up, we do have a picture of Tropical Storm Isaac that flooded Wellington. So could you just talk a little bit about your role at the Drainage District and what the district does, and then maybe what happened with Isaac?
Lake Worth Drainage District is a special taxing district, single purpose. Its sole mission is to provide drainage for southeastern Palm Beach County. About half the population of Palm Beach County resides within the Lake Worth Drainage District, pretty much extending from Boca Raton on the south up to portions of West Palm Beach in the north. And we have a series of canals, about 500 miles, that were designed when the agency was created by the legislature in 1915. The engineers that designed it had graph paper, pencils, and slide rules. That was it. They designed a system that was incredibly robust because of the uncertainty. They didn't have a lot of data, but they knew the threat from tropical systems. And that system has served this part of Palm Beach County for over 100 years. We react to all kind of weather systems. Right now we're pumping water like crazy because it's dry, but we're on the threshold of an active hurricane season, so we're preparing to move water in large quantities based on those forecasts as we see storms develop. So our staff is like a 24/7 operation. We have computer automated systems, we have backup generators, all for the purpose of being able to move large quantities of water on short notice and do it as rapidly as possible. The goal is to keep water out of your homes and businesses. It's very common to see flooding in streets. Don't park your car in the street if you hear a tropical storm or a hurricane is coming, because there could be flooding there. But the objective of the system that was designed in 1915, the new developments and the criteria for stormwater developed by Florida Department of Environmental Protection and South Florida Water Management District, to keep the water in your lake systems, in your stormwater systems, and out of your homes.
Great. So let's stay on the topic of water. And Mayor Kevin or Mary, you can talk about how decisions are made on evacuations. Because is it water or wind? Most people think wind when we talk about hurricanes.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much for hosting this. It's wonderful when we can get in front of our local residents and talk about what we do and how we make the decisions. So I commend all of you for coming out today and those that may be watching to want to get educated. So when we issue evacuation orders, with the exception of individuals that live in manufactured or mobile homes, basically, we evacuate those individuals because of the threat of wind. Because we don't want them to be in a structure that maybe could be compromised from extreme wind. But any other evacuation orders we issue is due typically to our anticipated storm surge inundation, and we work very closely with our partners at the National Hurricane Center and the National Weather Service to determine what that impact is going to be to our community. And our local weather service office will get down to the community level and let us know what they anticipate based on the storm, whether it's going to be heavy rainfall, whether we're going to have excessive storm surge. So that is the determination that drives our decision making for issuing evacuation orders. And we don't take those decisions lightly. There is a lot of thought that goes into that. And individuals need to know that we're looking at that information for that particular storm. We're not looking at the 04 and 05 season of what happened. We're not even looking at the last storm. We're looking at the threats and hazards from the current storm that's approaching, and that is what's driving our decision making. And those decisions are difficult because we don't want individuals to have to leave their home if they don't have to. So, and that's why we say when we make that decision to issue evacuation orders, we want people to heed those warnings because there is a lot of research, data, and information sharing that goes into that decision making.
One thing I'll add, just from a inland perspective, and of course Mary's been doing this a long time here in Palm Beach, but for those viewers that are all across the state, part of the know your zone, your evacuation zone, and then there's another portion of that is know your home. And it's very, very important for people to understand their home and their community, especially if you're in inland areas. Let's say you're in Orange County, Orlando, Lake County, et cetera. If it floods at your house when it rains, and then you see a storm that's going to come, like a Hurricane Ian, that's going to dump 18 inches of rain, you need to, there's no model for that, right? So if it floods at your home when it rains, and you're going to get 18 inches of that, then you probably need to go ahead and evacuate for the freshwater side of the house. We do really, really good job on the storm surge modeling, on the evacuation, the traditional evacuation zones across the state of Florida. And I want to reiterate what Mary said. The single decision that a local emergency manager probably just goes over and over and over in their head more than any other decision in a disaster is when to issue the evacuation order. That is, you're either going to be a hero or you're going to be a zero when it comes to that. And the community, if it wasn't what they predicted and they didn't need to evacuate, then you're going to judge your emergency management director based on that evacuation order. So I just want to give that a little bit of context to say, look, if Mary, in this case for Palm Beach, or any of the other 66 out of 67 county directors call for that evacuation order, you can rest assured it's been thought of long and hard, and it's not something that they really, really want to do, because we have to make decisions based on the best information we have at the time, and that's not always going to be, and probably 99% of the time, not going to be a full picture. So just know that they've had a lot of anxiety and angst over that.
Hey, Kim, can I ask a question about the drainage situation?
yes.
So is there, if the water levels are at where you want them to be at the beginning of hurricane season, is there an amount of rain that the system can take before you're going to get, significant flooding and you just can't deal with it? I mean, we saw what happened in Houston with Harvey. Right. They had up to 5 feet of rain, right? Now, you wouldn't, that was in a fairly isolated place, but widespread 3 to 4 feet.
Right.
I mean, I assume that our systems here couldn't take 3 to 4 feet of rain either,
No
or
way.
even 2 feet probably.
Right. No, the systems are designed based on a statistical rain event once in 25 years, 3 days. It's about 8 to 10, some cases 12 inches. And you expect to see the ponds full, water in your streets, water coming in your yard, but again, the homes are safe. But when you get beyond that, 15, 20 inches of rain, that's pretty much the limits that the system can handle, and you can expect severe flooding and maybe even flooding in homes. Examples of that aren't necessarily hurricane related, but we've seen two. 2014, Kings Point was flooded, had 22 inches of rain in a 24-hour period. Not long ago, same thing happened in Fort Lauderdale at the airport. Those are far beyond the capacity of most drainage systems to handle. So we have to be prepared for those as well.
So I remember talking about Broward County now, not Palm Beach County, but Broward County. And because there's a ridge there, right? So everything that is west of I-95, say, or somewhere in the I-95 Federal Highway US 1 area, that's all downhill to the west, right? So that used to be Everglades out there. And people that know Broward County, there's a road called Pine Island Road. It's called an island because it used to be an island out there, but it's a main road right now. And the idea was, if it rained some excessive amount, a couple of feet out there, it would take a month for that water to drain, right? You can only drain it at an inch or two a day or something. It's a pretty slow process, isn't it? If you really have flooding above the ground to get it out to the ocean, it's what is your rate in Palm Beach County?
Palm Beach County in the urban areas is about 3 inches a day, which is pretty significant. Agricultural areas is 3/4 of an inch a day. So for a typical major storm event in our region, we can recover from flooding within 48 hours, 72 hours, to where it's accessible. People can start to get out of their homes. So
Unless you have 3 feet.
Now, if you have several feet of rain, it's going to take significantly longer. Yeah.
Okay, great. So can you guys talk, just back to evacuations quickly, about shadow evacuations and maybe what happened with Irma?
Well, I'll start with that because I think we ended up having to deal with that at the state probably more so than at a local level. But we over-evacuated Hurricane Irma by about 3 million people. So just let that number sink in. So 3 million more people evacuated than what needed to. They were not evacuation zones. They were in post-2004, actually for this area, post-1998-ish Florida Building Code, or what was the Miami-Dade Building Code at the time. They did not need to evacuate. Now, there are certain needs that individual households have, such as you may be electrical dependent. You know, in a storm, you're going to lose your power. And, you know, with our partners at FPL and Duke and TECO and so on, you know, we amassed, with their help, 40,000 electrical workers. They got 85% of the power restored in Hurricane Ian impacted areas in 48 hours. That's never been done before in the history of the United States. And again, FPL was very, very strong there. But, you know, you're going to lose power. If you're an individual that has to have power, then yes, certainly you need to make that decision to evacuate for your household if you're outside of an evacuation zone. But we had way, way too many people leaving, and then they end up on I-95, the turnpike, heading north, US 27, US 98, heading north, and people turned around and came back home that, you know, realistically, did they need to evacuate in the first place? No. What we want people to do is evacuate. The other thing to this is we want people to evacuate tens of miles. The days, you know, there's a little bit of age up here, except for the ladies, obviously, but you know, I'm from Jacksonville, Florida, and I know that one of your Florida Times Union picks up on this. So I'm from Jacksonville. You know, in the 1970s and 80s, my mom and dad, their plan was to go from Jacksonville, Florida, all the way to Atlanta, Georgia, 370-something miles, to evacuate from a storm that may come in. You know, I was a Donna, Dora, David kind of child. Well, that scared people, and, you know, they figured go all the way to Atlanta, you'll have a hotel or whatever it's going to be. We do not need to do that anymore. You just need to get, in Florida, we have the best building code. We have the highest rated building code in the United States and probably in the world. We score a 95. I saw this on some factoid in a mass media kind of tidbit, but we scored a 95 out of 100. Nobody else came close to us on the Florida Building Code. So the Florida Building Code works. So what you need to do is get from where you're at to a safe structure, period. Now, I'll probably kick this over to Mary right now, but what we want you to do is evacuate to friends and family, right? That's the first step is if you have to evacuate to friends and family, and then I'll let Mary talk more about the sheltering process and those things of last resort in the evacuation.
Absolutely. So, you know, there's inherent risk with evacuating just in general, car accidents, you name it. And the reason we tell people to prepare to stay home if they don't have to evacuate are for all of these reasons we talked about. If your street's flooded, but your home's safe, be prepared to be shut in at home, right? Be ready for that. We don't want people to evacuate if they don't have to, but if you have to, if you're in that situation, you know, we do offer sheltering for residents to go to, but I'm going to tell you, you're gonna wanna go to family and friends first. Because unless you like 20 square feet of a gymnasium floor next to somebody you don't know, then have at it, right? But we do provide a safe structure, we provide food, we provide hydration, but it's not comfortable, right? It's not the comfort creatures of home, it's not the comfort creatures of your friend or family member's home. So we encourage you to make those plans, have those decisions made now, so that you're not forced last minute to be in that situation if you are told to evacuate, to go to a shelter. But if it is your only choice and you have nowhere else to go, we want you to go there. Do not stay home if you're told to evacuate. We do not want people in their home in a storm surge area, and we do get the storm surge. Please heed those warnings if we ask for people to evacuate.
Can I talk about storm surge a second?
Yes, please.
So storm surge is, the words are common now, right? We know the words, because we've seen Hurricane Ian and we see the Gulf in that case that rose up 15 feet and plowed through Fort Myers Beach and essentially destroyed Fort Myers Beach. Well, on the east coast of Florida, we don't get as much storm surge as on the Gulf Coast. The storm surge is driven by a lot of things, but a key component is how shallow the floor underneath of the water, underneath of the Gulf, underneath the ocean is offshore. And on the East Coast, we have a big shelf not too far offshore. So what that does is that pushes the energy that's coming from the ocean toward the land up, so we get bigger waves. So on the Gulf Coast, you get higher water pushing farther inland. On the East Coast, you get higher waves. So along the southeast coast of Florida here, we can get a storm surge of like 10 feet. In 1926, the water came over Miami Beach, completely over Miami Beach, and the ocean met the bay. And obviously that was this giant hurricane. So a big hurricane, like in 1926, Ian was a medium big hurricane. These bigger size hurricanes like Katrina was a big hurricane across, produced tremendous storm surge. So we can get it here. Now, the issue is predicting it in advance, because the storm surge is extremely dependent on exactly where the strongest winds are. But Mary's got to order evacuations, what, 48 hours-ish? Is it 48? You know, or you're going to talk about them, start talking about them in that time frame anyway, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and it all depends on the time of day the storm is coming in
Right.
as well.
Because you don't want them evacuated in the middle of the night.
During the daylight, correct.
Right, you want them to do it during the day. Right, so you have to do this in advance. Well, in advance, we don't know precisely where the storm is. So the National Hurricane Center is taking into account the uncertainty in the size of the storm, in the intensity of the storm, in the angle that it's approaching the coast, because all these affect where the maximum storm surge is. And so they issue hurricane warnings and storm surge warnings for larger areas than end up getting it, just because even though that's they're the best in the world at what they do, we can't make precise forecasts 2, 3, 4 days in advance. We all know that, right? So that means that we have to over-evacuate by just the way the system works, because it takes time to get people to safety. So storm surge is a giant, complicated problem, and now in the modern world that we have so many people and so much wealth and so many things that are at risk if the ocean water rises and pushes into Lake Worth and pushes up the canals and pushes ocean water inland. It's a huge, huge, huge difficult problem that we haven't dealt with here in Southeast Florida in a long, long time, right? I mean, really, here in Palm Beach County, the two benchmark storms are 1928 and 1949, right? Those are the benchmark storms, right? But Palm Beach County, there's film of downtown West Palm Beach flooding in the 1926 Great Miami Hurricane. That was such a giant storm, back when we used to have these giant storms, like Irma, actually, but it came from a different angle. So storm surge we live in a storm surge zone here, and we have to behave like we understand that, even though it's very, very complicated. Let me just say one more. I just wrote a big post this morning, by the way. If you go on my Facebook page, you can read it about the evacuations and all that. One of the, I think, and I'd be interested in both of you guys' take on this, is high rises. So the high rises we build here, as Kevin said, the modern ones are built like battleships. They're not going to fall down in any kind of hurricane. But if you're in one and you're near the coast and the storm surge comes in, and let's say you do the right thing and you go down to the second or third floor in the hallway and ride it out there. Nobody should stay in their apartment during a storm surge in a high rise. But second or third hallway, you're going to be fine, except that there's going to be debris. You're not going to be able to get out of your building. There's going to be no power, no water, maybe no communications. And you're stuck in your building. And until you guys can go and clean it up, right, and get access. So that, I think, is an undiscussed issue because people feel safe in these modern buildings. They can't hardly open the sliding glass door. It's like a bank vault, but they feel safe, but they can get stranded.
Well, we just had this in Tallahassee in the tornadoes. We lost power there in Tallahassee for about 5 days, but we had a 3-story senior living community, right? Now there was not a whole lot of advance warning. You know that we did have the enhanced level that was coming in, but a lot of people don't really understand tornadoes. And I know this is a hurricane segment, so we'll stay focused on that. But the principle is the same. A lot of people in that senior living facility were on the 3rd floor. The power went out for 5 days. They physically could not get down. Now, this was not a nursing home. It wasn't an assisted living facility, but there were people that physically could not go 3 flights of stairs to get down. So we ended up having to call paramedics in and get them, transported down and take them to a shelter and things like that. But that's a very, very recent example of what Brian's talking about. And I think there's a second thing that I'll mention here in just a second. But it's vertical evacuation. How many of you all in here live in a condominium? You live in a high rise, right? So imagine that elevator going out, and imagine you have to come down 3, 4, 5, 10 stories to the bottom. And when you get to the bottom, you may be stepping into local ponding water. You may step into, depending on where you're at, you may step into sand. You may not be able to get your vehicle out from underneath the parking garage that's underneath the building, so on and so forth. Those are all things that you have to take into consideration. That's a part of that know your home piece of know your zone. Again, we recommend, and I believe Mary is the same way, if the high rise is in the evacuation zone, evacuate. Don't go up, go out, all right? So make sure you're doing that. The second thing is, and Brian did a very, very good job of articulating the difference between the shelves that we have. However, I don't want you to take that as some portion of safety. The thing that keeps me up at night, the very first disaster that I had, I was winding out COVID, but the first disaster I had as the director of the Division of Emergency Management was a Surfside building collapse. That ultimately was water generated, water erosion, degradation generated. I'm very, very concerned about the 1970s and 80s, specifically construction of high rises. The ones that were built here in the 50s were, they're tanks. But then we lost some building consistency and continuity as we went into the 70s and 80s, and of course they call that era the cocaine cowboys that were building those buildings here in Southeast Florida. I learned that from Surfside. And then we got the Florida Building Code back, which now we're building tanks again. But I am really, really concerned about a 10, 12, 15-foot seas, wave action coming and pounding over and over and over this 1970s, 80s, early 90s construction. And then do we end up having another building collapse? Again, the last place you want to be when that's happening is on 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 10th floor. And then ultimately we lose the foundation out from underneath a home. This actually happened in Daytona Beach Shores. We didn't have the building collapse, but I have pictures on my phone where I could show you we had 1/3 of the foundation completely washed out from underneath a high rise, and that high rise was not pinned. So it had that Hurricane Nicole continued to batter Daytona Beach Shores, that condo would have come down. So I think that's very, very important. I don't know if Mary's got any follow-up to any of that.
No, I would agree. I would echo everything in that point. And, if that building is in that evacuation zone, that means everybody in that building should evacuate, not just the individuals on the lower levels. So that's definitely, I would echo everything Kevin just said.
So I just wanted to go back to something you said about Hurricane Ian and getting the electricity back on pretty quickly. If everybody was here in 2004 and 2005, some of us went 2 weeks without electricity. That was 20 years ago. So, and I know FPL has done a lot of work to harden the system. So Jamie, can you just tell us maybe just briefly what you guys have done and then what people should expect after the storm? How long should they, I know it depends on the storm, but how long should they be prepared for?
And absolutely. So you're correct. The 04-05 hurricane season was really a turning point for FPL, and it was the birth of our hardening programs that have really allowed us to look at the way we engineer our infrastructure. And absolutely no grid is going to be storm-proof. Mother Nature is incredibly powerful. However, we've made some incredible investments since that 04 and 05 season and continue to learn, not only in the strength of our infrastructure, looking to make the strength of our poles to stand up against extreme wind loading, right? And to make sure recently in undergrounding some of our neighborhood lines so that we're avoiding some of those vegetation outages, as we often see in the storm. Investments in smart grid technology that allows some self-healing capability to reduce the extent of the outage. Those investments really have helped, as you mentioned, the restoration time that you saw in the 04-05 hurricane season to what you mentioned just a couple of years ago with a massive storm like Ian, and being able to restore so quickly. It's because of the investments that we're making year-round to build a more resilient grid. Again, no grid is storm-proof. Mother Nature's incredibly powerful, but we want to make those investments, and also we have a tried and true restoration engine. It's been battle tested here in Florida, and we really look at a couple of things happening at once. One, we want to make sure that we are working on restoring facilities that get the communities up and running quickly. So we work with local municipalities and government officials to understand what's important. Where should we be focusing that attention? Usually that is, emergency centers, hospitals, nursing homes, critical medical facilities, but also grocery stores, gas stations, things of that nature to make sure that the residents in that community can get out and get the supplies that they need to get back up and running. And then we are working to make sure that we're impacting the most people that we can in restoring an outage, getting those main feeder lines, those main community lines back on first, and then working up absolutely all the way to the meter. We do hold a certain amount of our crews in our EOCs to make sure that we can handle, partnering with those different county and community emergency response also so that we are able to address any concerns, any requests that they have. And then, finally, we really absolutely want to make sure that we understand what's critical to the community and make sure that we get out there and do that absolutely safely and as quickly as possible.
I want to add one thing to that, and something we did in Hurricane Ian, and FPL was at the center of this, along with Duke Energy, and that was FPL and Duke have got just a ton of resources, and they got their stuff restored very quickly in Hurricane Ian, and sometimes we don't really know what our government leaders do for us that make a difference, but I think this was one of those tangible things that the governor made a decision in Hurricane Ian that he was going to pay FPL and Duke and TECO, those private independent-owned utilities, to come in and help the municipal electric associations and the cooperative electric associations. That had never been done before in the history of the state. And that is your government in action doing something very positive. That cost us millions of dollars, taxpayer dollars, millions of dollars. But we got the power restored. 85% of the power was restored to Hurricane Ian individuals in 48 hours. And then we had 90% restored in about 96 hours. That's a huge thing. And I think times like this, when we talk, these town halls, you need to know that your government is actually doing positive things and making things that make sense and do common sense type approach. But again, I know Manny at the time, and I think Manny's retired now, but I used to call him the power czar. But he is, the team that's there at FPL, and again, the independent-owned utilities, working with the Florida Municipal Electric Association, with the Florida Electric Cooperative Association, all of them now, and again, that didn't happen. Before 2020, I'm getting my years run together here, before 2021, that would have been municipal electric helping municipal electric, cooperatives helping cooperatives, IOUs going with contractors, and IOUs as independent-owned utilities. Now it's one team, one fight, everybody's in it. The governor's going to pay the bill. Let's just get the power back on. And that's a testament to what we do now in the state of Florida, and that is not done anywhere else in the country.
Right. So how many days supply should people have? I've heard 3, and then we went to 5. Are we at 7? What should we be expecting?
So I'll start. We at the state recommend 7, and the reason we recommend 7 is you just don't know what you don't know. It may be hard to get into you, and again, I'll take a storm like Tallahassee just experienced. Vegetation, heavy tree canopy it is going to take a long time for us to get into and clear those roads, clear those electric lines. So we had power out for 5 to 7 days in portions of Tallahassee. If you are further away from, as Jamie was talking about, you're further away from those feeder lines, those high transmission lines, and you live, I'm trying to think of stuff here in Palm Beach. If you live in Pahokee, if you live in a rural portion of this county, it's going to take longer to get that power restored. So again, I think it's a combination. We recommend 7, but I think it's also a combination of knowing where you live, and if I'm off-grid remote, I'm going to need more. If I'm urban core, like right next to a hospital, then maybe I need less.
So, Kim, I've been talking about this for a long time, and I agree that people should have it 7 days. But the hard part about the 7 days is the water, right? Who wants to have gallons and gallons of water? But you don't need that, is the thing. If what we can, this would be a fantastic statewide project. If talk about a place to put tax dollars. Anyway, is in reusable or inflatable water containers. So I have on my shelf these collapsible water containers I ordered from Amazon. And so they just sit there, and they're 5 and 10 gallon containers. So before a storm, I go over to the tap and I fill them up, and I don't have to schlep water around anywhere, right? As long as there's running water, I can fill them up, and they'll last. I could have weeks of water in these, handful of collapsible containers. So to me, that solves a lot of problems if you don't have to carry around gallons of water.
Sounds like a new item for us
Yes.
at Hurricane Expos.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing about water is most people have heard about, do something in your bathtub, right? Fill your bathtub 3/4 full, whatever. But all you need is a painter's sheet, one of those plastic sheets that you lay down on the floor when you paint. Put that in the bathtub, then the water's not going to run out of the bathtub, and then fill it up 3/4 full. You don't want to have it too full because that could be structurally an issue. 3/4 full, and then you have water to flush the toilet, and then you have water to function. It'll last for a long time, right? So with those two really simple things that don't cost any money, you solve the water at home problem, and then you can worry about having food. And having a week's worth of tuna fish is not complicated, right? That's not hard, right? Tuna fish and protein bars or whatever. You can easily do that. It's the water thing that's the tricky one.
So let's walk through a scenario. Let's say a storm is coming. It's threatening South Florida, which we really have not had, like I said, a landfalling storm since David. And when in Broward and Miami-Dade, do you know when the last landfall?
Well, Hurricane Andrew obviously was in
okay,
Dade,
right.
but the thing is, it feels like, I should say this, it feels like we've had a lot of hurricanes, right? We haven't had them here in South Florida, and the hurricanes we've had that you really think of, Wilma, Francis, right? They were Category 2s, orders of magnitude weaker than the storms that used to hit here. In the first 7 decades of the 20th century, 7 hurricanes came over downtown Miami, and that didn't count the great Fort Lauderdale hurricane that would have caused tremendous devastation in unpopulated Pompano, Boca, Coral Springs didn't exist. All these places in where little tiny village of Delray and Boynton and all these places were little tiny places then when that giant hurricane came right over Fort Lauderdale. So, hurricanes used to be a lot worse than we have experienced in our time here in terms of, except for Hurricane Andrew. Hurricane Andrew obviously was off the charts in South Dade. But the thing about Hurricane Andrew was that it was so small, it was like a giant tornado, that people from North Dade, Broward, Palm Beach County could go down and help right away. In the Great Miami Hurricane of 1926, or if we had a 1928 hurricane, it was so big that everybody was affected. So you don't have the neighbors being able to help. Everybody was on their own in their own communities, right? We haven't experienced that here, and that's part of history. That's part of our called HCCA. Florida State runs the super ensemble. It does the same thing, smart averaging. So the bottom line is the National Hurricane Center forecast is better than any model. So looking at models to try and sort out, okay, what's the real story? I mean, I've been asked for years and years, which one do you look at? No, I look at the National Hurricane Center because they've sorted through it. I mean, not that I don't look at models to understand the bigger picture for what I do on television, but that's the bottom line. The spaghetti models are decoration, but they really don't give you any information. The National Hurricane Center forecast gives you the best information. Now, unfortunately, in this country, we don't start putting out alerts until there's a watch at 48 to 60 hours. In the Bahamas and Cuba, they have a third level of alert. I would like to see us move to that because things are so much more complicated at the coast now that we need people to be paying attention prior to a watch and have information, official information before that. But in any case, as far as where the storm is going to go, where the center of it's going to go, the National Hurricane Center forecast is the best model that you can look at.
I'm going to set Mary up here. There's two people that you need to know and you need to trust inside of your county, wherever that's at, as we're broadcasting across the state. The number one person you need to look at is the TV meteorologist that you know and trust, that you have if that relationship is every night on your TV at 6:15 or whatever that is, get that person, tune into that individual. And then the second one, and I can't tell you who my favorite is because I got a lot of friends that are meteorologists. So the second one is your local emergency manager. Those are the two people you really have got to pay attention to when there is a threat, a weather threat or a man-made threat, if you will. You've got to listen to that local emergency manager because they're the ones that are going to be making those decisions and activating what it is that you're going to do. Right?
No, and I would agree with that. And I have great relationships with our local meteorologists. Every single one of them on our local networks, I could call every one of them right now on their cell phones and they would pick up. Because you don't let me in your bedroom at night when you're laying there watching the news, but you listen to your chief meteorologist of your favorite station. So we're constantly communicating, having that information, and when they're getting ready to go on their broadcast, believe it or not, they'll shoot me a text and say, remind me what this means. Do we put the bridges up? Do we put the bridges down? And we have that communication back and forth. So if you're getting your information from trusted sources like that, just know they're communicating to us as well. So I want you to know that. But if you hear something from our local EOC, a message, just know that a lot of background information has gone into it. But if you're getting your information from your local meteorologist, just know that they're in contact with us as well.
Okay, let me say one more thing that I wanted to add. So I don't, by the way, most people don't think of it this way, but I don't forecast where the hurricane's going. I use the National Hurricane Center forecast, and my job is to explain it in a way that people understand it and the reasoning behind it, because it's very technical. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of data to sort through, right? If you just read the advisories on the National Hurricane Center website that millions of people do, and that's good, but then they come to people like me or the local meteorologist to understand what it means, understand the background, understand how is this different, how is this the same, and so forth. So that's what I have always thought my role as it's not to say, I think the storm is going here, even though they say it's going here, because we don't know where it's going exactly. So even if I think, well, I probably would have made it a little left, who cares? Because nobody is sure, right? So that's what my role is, to interpret and explain and provide perspective on what their forecast is. They are the best in the world at it, so I let them do that. And there's plenty for me to do to support that.
Tommy and Jamie, what do you use? I know FPL for sure has an in-house meteorologist. I mean, are you guys making your own forecasts? Or you?
Very similarly, the National Hurricane Center is the expert and we do use that. But just like you explained, our in-house meteorologists take that information, they decode it for us, explain it so that we can make decisions on, how many crews we might need to bring in. We're able to feed that national hurricane forecast, both the track, the intensity, and the wind fields that are being forecast into a damage model that we have that can predict what type of damage might it cause to our infrastructure in that area, and what would we need to restore that. That helps us make decisions ahead of time. We are in Florida, we are a peninsula here, so it's important that we're not only collaborating with the other utilities here in the state of Florida, but also in the southeast, and if necessary, depending on the storm, across the country, that we're able to get men and women that can help us restore quickly. And we need to get those men and women down here ahead of the storm, make sure that they are staged safely, and that they're ready to help us get power back on as immediately when it's safe to do so.
Yeah. And Tommy, are you talking to the, so what does happen? Does the National Weather Service talk to you directly? Is there someone staged at the Lake Worth Drainage District or the Hurricane Center?
No, we follow the forecast of the Hurricane Center, but because our drainage network is intertwined with the primary drainage system that the South Florida Water Management District operates, they have meteorologists in their operations control center, and we communicate with them daily. They issue what they call a quantitative precipitation forecast, which they estimate how many inches of rain are going to occur over the next 5 days at specific locations in South Florida. And then together, we work how we're going to operate our systems in tandem. We don't want to dump too much water on them that they aren't prepared for. So it's sort of like we're both driving a vehicle together, and we want to make sure we're communicating both on the forecast, but also our reaction to that forecast.
Great.
That South Florida Water Management District, and you're the expert here, but so that was created after the 1947 hurricanes, right? In late September, there was the Fort Lauderdale hurricane that had a significant effect in Palm Beach County and even in Miami, and would be extremely destructive today. And then 3 weeks later, there was another storm, and it had been a very wet year before these storms happened, right? So they said, now I don't know whether this is anecdotal or just what, but I was told a number of times that you could take a canoe from Fort Lauderdale to Naples for 9 weeks after those two storms, because there was not the massive drainage system across the whole region that we have today.
That's correct. No, that's correct. The peninsula pretty much was flooded. The Corps of Engineers developed a map that showed flood inundation, and it was contiguous to Naples, up into Jacksonville, into the St. Johns River, and there were areas flooded for a period of weeks and months, and that was the impetus in 1949 for the state of Florida to go to the federal government and request the Corps of Engineers to construct the flood control system. Without that flood control system, we would be living today in the Everglades. So it allows us all to be here, but the landscape remembers it was the Everglades when it rains really hard, and we have to recognize that and be prepared to react to that.
So we've been talking for an hour up here. Just want to give the audience a chance to ask any questions.
All right, well, we have one question, and we have a microphone, but if you're more comfortable just writing it down, I'll pick it up. This question is a participant here this evening who says, I live in a community that has impact windows and doors, but not shutters. How safe are we?
Well, I can take that. So the impact windows and doors, assuming they're Miami-Dade County certified, that's the kind of certification stamp that everybody uses around the world. Actually, they refer to Miami-Dade products, are extremely strong. You cannot break the windows. So that's good. The question is, was the building built to code? Were the windows and doors installed properly? If the building was inspected as it was supposed to be, these days that's what they do. They put in the frame, the inspector comes, says, yes, you have anchored the frame into the structure properly. The frame is actually weaker than what we call the glass, the glazing part of the windows now. So all that is super strong. you know, if it were me and it were a super strong hurricane, I still wouldn't be near the windows or doors during the hurricane. I'd be in an interior part of the building, and assuming that's not an evacuation zone, that would be a safe place to be. But again, I wouldn't be on a higher floor. The winds and the loading on the building are much worse on a high floor, depending on how tall that building is.
Great.
All right, a couple more. An evacuation question. If you're in Palm Beach County and you evacuate to Punta Gorda, what are the odds that you'll get hit there?
Well, every storm is different, right? And when we saw the storms of the past that crisscrossed in Orlando, where everybody decided to go, who would have thought that storms would be crisscrossing in Polk County or Orange County or Seminole County? So it's really important for people to know that they don't have to evacuate Palm Beach County. If you live in Palm Beach County, there is plenty of places to go within the county where you do not have to evacuate, because we can't predict not only where the storm is going to go at that moment you're traveling, but we don't know if that storm is going to shift and impact where you're going.
You do tourist evacuations right ahead of your general evac, typically?
We don't do.
And the reason I think that's important is because I think people need to know that the hotels are there.
Absolutely. And we don't issue, unlike the Keys where they tell the tourists to get out first, which rightfully so, you know, their road infrastructure. But we actually meet with our local hotels during a storm. We have that communication. There are so many different partners and stakeholders that we're communicating with, and a majority of those hotels and motels within an evacuation zone have what they call their sister facilities or their other facilities, where if you're a resident in that hotel, they will determine their timeline and get you evacuated to their sister facility that has taken in those residents for evacuation. So,
Yeah.
And it may be in another area, but if you live here and your home's here, don't leave here. We don't want you to leave here. We want to keep you here.
The only reason I would say go to Punta Gorda for the person that asked the question, if you got a friend or a family that lives in Punta Gorda, then that's probably the right thing to do. But to Mary's
Absolutely.
point, if you I know a little bit about our evacuation zones only because my stepson goes to FAU. So, but I mean, in general, it's if you're west of 95, you're in good hands.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to evacuate because your friend or family lives there, just do it early enough.
Yeah.
The last place we want you is on a road when a storm is coming across the state. So do it early enough. If you have that ability to do it early enough, then absolutely. If it's going to be the most comfortable place for you, absolutely. But just know that if it's a storm with damage, you may have trouble getting back. Mm-hmm. So that's the other part of it. You may have trouble re-entering the community for a longer period of time than if you were to have stayed.
There's one other issue, and that is that here in Southeast Florida, in general, the buildings are stronger than they are elsewhere in the state, even though new buildings everywhere in the peninsula are good buildings. Not as strong as in much of Southeast Florida, but good buildings. But in a lot of the state where they haven't had a lot of hurricane impacts, there are buildings that were built in the 70s and 80s and whatnot, and are not to the standards of buildings here. So you could be going to a friend's in Punta Gorda in a house that is not as hurricane ready as a place that if you stayed in Palm Beach County here. One other issue, though, that we don't talk about much. I wrote a lot about it this morning, and that is where to put your car, right? That's an unappreciated hurricane issue, is that everybody needs to have a plan for their car as well. And I know that, in Miami Beach, where I've lived, they open the parking garages. Do they do anything like that here? Or do you give any advice to people about their cars here?
I would, my piece of advice, and I'm sure Kevin can agree with me here, if you are an owner of an electric vehicle, you need to know what that means, having an electric vehicle. There are different issues that happen with electric vehicles, and we saw it post-Hurricane Ian. There are certain ways that those vehicles are towed. There's certain ways that those vehicles react to floodwaters. You need to understand that piece. The electric vehicle situation bothers me more than a parking garage because people don't understand that. And people don't understand that electric vehicle chargers aren't on every corner like every gas station. So if people are planning to evacuate to Punta Gorda or wherever they're going to go, they need to understand that if they're evacuating in a vehicle like that, that you may be one of hundreds fighting for that charger space. So just understand that, because that is really one of those evacuation concerns I think that emergency managers have been talking about in recent years. That is definitely a concern for us, even greater than parking garages and parking garage space. And we do not have the parking garage space like they have in Miami-Dade.
Yeah, well, I mean, they don't have anywhere near enough in Miami for all the cars. But, the thing is, they look at after Ian or pick a hurricane, any hurricane, thousands and thousands and thousands of cars get ruined, where some of them could have been saved with thought ahead of time. Before Hurricane Andrew, I said, and I did this for Wilma in my car, is figure out which direction the wind is coming, park it. I don't care if you drive up on your lawn, park it, jam up on your house on the other side of the house so that your house can provide some protection for your car if you don't have a garage, if you don't have any place to put it. Because imagine going through a hurricane, bad hurricane, surviving a hurricane, and not having a car. Right? I mean, that's a really difficult problem, right?
Yeah, we've done, I say we've done, I'll give credit where credit's due. Michelle Kukowski and Cy, I can't remember Cy's last name, but out of the Central Florida Regional Planning Council have just put together a one-pager on electric vehicles. So if you're an electric vehicle person, we're going to end up having this on our website. We'll provide it down to the counties as well. But coming in that briefing is we want you to get your electric vehicles less than 30% charged. If you're going to leave it behind, it's going to be susceptible to saltwater storm surge. We want you to drain that thing as low as it possibly can go. That's going to help prevent fires after the fact. If you are going to use it, this time of year, as well as your gas-powered vehicle, we want you to keep it at least halfway full. That's the new empty this time of year, because we don't want runs on electrical charging stations. We don't want runs on gas stations. We know that's going to happen, but even if we take all of those cars and we keep them at least halfway full, now they're filling up with 5, 6, 10 gallons worth of gas or a 50% charge and not taking and draining all the gas that's in the gas station. So halfway full is the new empty this time of year, so make sure that's happening. But we're going to push out a lot of information about electric vehicles. I know FPL, I want Jamie to talk a little bit about what they're doing, but FPL is leading the way with the Florida Department of Transportation on electrical vehicle charging in emergencies, and I think that's very, very applicable here.
We do have, are working with some pilots of portable charging stations and things like that can help electric vehicle owners. But still the same concerns, right? Yep. I echo everything that you said as far as being prepared and understanding what can happen differently with an electric vehicle than a traditional gas vehicle, especially in the case of storm surge or water submersion.
What does happen? They catch fire? What
yeah,
happens?
so the premier entity on this is CFO Jimmy Petronas, and he's you can go out there at his website at the CFO's office, Chief Financial Officer, Division of the State Fire Marshal, and look at this. But we are having we've had a lot of vehicle fires post Hurricane Ian. We had remember there's as Bryan said, we had 15 foot of storm surge over the top of Fort Myers Beach. So we had a lot of electrical vehicle fires when that storm ran off, and then people tried to crank their car and or it just spontaneously combusted from the saltwater intrusion. So that is a thing. Batteries and salt water, batteries contain water. They don't contain salt water. That's bad. So if you do come into that situation, that's the premier problem is that they're going to catch fire. And then, of course, when you have an electrical fire, that is not just like a regular wood burning fire where you're out in your backyard burning wood. That's hazardous materials. When you look at the guts of a battery, all of those things are hazardous materials. And you don't want to be near that car when it's off gassing and when it has that smoke. That is very, very lethal smoke. So we want to make sure that you're well far away from that.
Do we have any more questions?
Yes, we have a couple more. This is a perennial evacuation question. What do I do with my pets, cats, dogs, and the hamster?
Go, Mary.
Well, we would encourage you to evacuate to, friend or family first, but if you do need to evacuate to a shelter, we have pet-friendly shelters here. So we have all of that information available on our website, readypbc.com. We have so much information on there that we're happy for individuals to look at that website and see all that local information. But if you're not from Palm Beach County, your local emergency management office will have all of that information about where to take your pets, shelter locations, evacuation information. And I think Kevin said it earlier, sometimes the government agencies are underrated about some of the things we do, but what we all do on a regular basis is plan for these things and plan and try to get the information out to anyone and everybody as possible. So I would encourage you to go on our website or go on the local emergency manager's website to see where you can register for special needs shelter, pet-friendly shelters, you name it. It'll be on the local emergency manager's website.
And right now, through through June the 14th, is a sales tax holiday to include items for your pets, cat food, cat litter, bowls, leashes, muzzles, dog food up to 50 pounds, dry food up to 50 pounds. All of that stuff's tax-free. As the governor said, I'll take a little paraphrase from him the other day. You're going to buy it anyway. You might as well get the 7-8% discount on it while time's going while time is good. We will do. I'll just take the plug here. We're going to do another sales tax holiday for the same items in late August. That'll run into September. So we got 2 14-day sales tax holidays to get you ready for hurricane season, even inside the peak portion of the hurricane season. So please make sure you're taking advantage of that.
Are there animals that you can't take in a pet shelter? I mean, we mentioned hamsters here, so that's something stuck in my mind.
Yeah, it's basically your domestic animals and what we call pocket pets. So your gerbils, your hamsters. We won't take farm animals into those locations, unfortunately. You can't come with your cow, your pig, your goat. But standard domestic animals will come into those shelters. But I just want to do that plug really quick that Kevin said about the tax-free holiday. And we get a lot of comments about that 7-day supply, and we too encourage people to do a 7-day supply, disaster supply kit. And people always talk about the cost of that. So the fact that there's a tax-free holiday, but my tip to people is go to a store that has a buy one, get one free offer. Right now with tax-free days, buy one, get one free. Keep the regular one you'd buy anyway and put the free one away. There you're doing your disaster supply kit on the cheap, and you'll have those supplies readily available. So any of those tips we can share with people, I think it's important for us to do.
Great.
All right. Well, speaking of supplies and tax-free holidays and so forth, should the list of supplies include a radio that runs on batteries?
Absolutely. Crank radio, battery-operated radio. You need to have all those items within your supply kit, including the battery-operated lanterns, flashlights, things like that. No candles. No candles. No candles. The days of candles are gone. The days of putting masking tape across your windows are gone. Believe me, I grew up in South Florida. I remember that. The tape on the windows, the candles in the supply kit, those days are gone. So anything battery operated is a good thing. You need to have that communication. You need to stay informed. So, but pull these things out. If you have a supply kit and you say, oh, I have a supply kit, I built it last year. You need to pull it out, look at things, see if they're expired, make sure your batteries aren't corroded. But anything battery operated should be in your supply kit now.
Yeah, we don't need candles now because we have LED flashlights. Back in the day, it was hard to keep a flashlight going for days, right? The flashlight just wouldn't last. But now with LED flashlights, LED lanterns, you can have light that with a minimal number of batteries. You still need to have packages of batteries, but they're relatively cheap, and you can have light now, even with no power for an extended time.
If Craig Fugate was here, he'd be punching me in the side of the leg and say, mention FPRN. So Florida's Public Radio Emergency Network, we talk about radios. All of your local, I should say local, and Mary, you can give the actual channel here, but your public radio, State University System Radio Network has never in the history of State University Radio Network gone down, even through all of our hurricanes. So that's a really good channel to plug into right after the storm until your other local radio station comes back up and running. 99 times out of 100, that local State University radio system is going to be up and running. I don't know what that is for this particular area
And you
here.
did put me on the spot because I can't tell you that number right now. But we will definitely get it and put that on our website immediately after this.
Yeah, I know that the it's one of the universities out of Miami, and then I know we've got obviously UF and some others, but I cannot remember which one it is.
Well, it's Southeast Florida. It's WLRN, which comes out of Miami,
Yes.
but they rebroadcast in Palm Beach. And so the good thing is that if a storm were to hit Palm Beach and knock everything out in Palm Beach, you would still be able to get the Miami broadcast on the radio. So we're lucky here to have adjacent radio markets so that we
Yes.
can still get information.
I will say this: if you don't have a radio and you're going to end up going to buy one that has HD on it, HD channels, because again, with the state radio, the State University Systems Radio Network, they will dedicate an HD channel. So think 88.1-1-2-3-4, but they will dedicate a HD radio channel to nothing but Mary, myself, on that public radio emergency network. Very, very little known thing that your government does well again. One of those things that we do very well, but a lot of people don't know about that.
And that is true if you're in Palm Beach County too. We have our government television station, Channel 20, in Palm Beach County. And Channel 20 will broadcast any and all in their entirety press conferences that happen in our EOC. So I know people are used to their traditional ABC, NBC, CBS, but our government channel here locally will broadcast everything we're doing in the EOC, every broadcast, every press release in multiple languages in their entirety.
All right, we have a question's been emailed to us, so if you're watching and you want to get questions in, you can email them to us at newsroom@palmbeachpost.com. So question is, we live in a no evacuation zone, and our home was built in 2003 with hurricane clips, etc. However, we do not have impact windows and are not able to put up plywood. How safe are we?
I would have to start with where are they at? Since this is being emailed in, I don't know if they're in an evacuation zone or not. So we'll just
They're saying they're not in an evacuation zone.
They're not in an evacuation zone.
They're noted.
So I mean, again, I think we're always going to be a fan of harden your home, do the things that you can do. I would say to that particular viewer that's watching right now, if you need help putting up board or plywood on your home, there are volunteer organizations just about in every single city and county that will help do those things ahead of a storm. We've got some very, very innovative programs across the state of Florida. If it's a cost issue, depending on the age and all that, I'd send them to my Safe Florida Home. That is actually, again, at the Chief Financial Officer, Jimmy Petronis' website. There are a lot of people that have applied for that, but you can get money in a grant to actually harden your windows, put shutters up, do some things to your roof. So again, that's a very little known government function that we do. And again, My Safe Florida Homes would be a really good place to go for that. And I'm going to assume since it was email, it's probably outside of our network, unless you got something else, Mary.
Yeah, no, I would say there's a lot of nonprofit organizations and then faith-based organizations. We meet with those faith-based organizations, nonprofits, to talk about what resources they can bring in times of disaster. And a lot of those organizations will rally their members and do a lot of this pre-storm activities for individuals that maybe can't physically do put on their shutters. So, use your community resources, but you have to do that now. You can't do that 24, 48 hours before we expect to have a storm impact us. It's too late. So people need to work on those types of resources today before there's a storm out there.
Yeah, the bottom line is that in a home without hurricane protection on it is not safe in a strong hurricane. In a lower grade hurricane, if you're not near the windows and you have a interior hallway or closet or something like that, you'll probably be okay. But if things start really blowing around and break the window and the wind comes in, your roof is vulnerable and your home is vulnerable. So, I mean, in Florida, we need hurricane protection on every building.
I have a quick question. When would you guys recommend putting the shutters up? When is a good time? Like a warning or a watch?
Well, it really depends on the size of the storm and it depends on the kind of shutters. So if you're talking about panel shutters, people have died putting in panel shutters because if the wind is blowing, they're really hard to maneuver, and they kind of come down and they can cut you and so forth. So if you're talking about those kind of shutters, which many people still have, but fewer people have now, because we have impact windows.
I still have them.
Yeah, right. Right. Lots of people do, and I did as well when I had my last home. But those you got to put up before the wind is blowing. So I used to say on television, okay, folks, here's the thing. We don't know the storm is coming, but tomorrow morning it's going to be kind of breezy here. So if you're going to do this, I would do this before the sun goes down tonight, because it may be just too windy and too dangerous to do it tomorrow morning, and this is something that there's a reasonable chance we're going to have to do. So you have to kind of look at it that way, right? You don't want to be doing that in the dark, and you don't want to be doing it when it's windy. So quite often you need to do it earlier, and I don't know if that's part of your instructions to the community. Do you do that, or is that left to the weather folks?
I mean, we leave that decision to the homeowner. A traditional rule of thumb is 48 hours, right, with a watch. That's kind of the traditional rule of thumb. But it all depends on, and Kevin has mentioned, knowing your home. How long does it take you? I have a lot of windows on my home, and I have the panels. And I will tell you, I live on a dead end. But I can tell you, a lot of my friends and family drive by when I'm at work, and there's a storm coming, because their guide is when they see my husband putting up the shutters, they're all starting. So whatever your comfort level is, whenever you feel comfortable, but we know that there's a lot of homeowners associations as well that have very strict rules. So you need to understand those homeowners associations, but it's your home, your life, your property. So whatever you feel comfortable with, and whenever you're ready to put those shutters on safely, we would encourage you to do so. But don't do it too early, because then you're blocking a window that could be your escape route should you have any type of an incident in your home, like a fire. So, but the standard rule of thumb, when people ask us that, is 48 hours. I don't know if Kevin?
No, I firmly agree that, when the watches go up, that's usually when I was in Flagler or Pasco County, that's when we would do that. I obviously don't get that direction anymore at the state level, but the one thing that I mentioned while Mary was talking was make sure you practice that. That's not a skill that you use every day. You may use it once every 10 or 20 years. So you may want to just pull a panel or two out and say, okay, remind yourself how all of that goes together, just to familiarize yourself with it, because when the disaster is happening is not the time to try to figure out where were the screws at and where were this at, and does it latch this way, does it latch that way. You want to that's a part of your preparedness plan. You need to practice those things, and I'm not saying board up the entire all of Mary's house, but you may need to practice a window or two just to make sure you know how to do that.
And can you just define a watch and a warning? So,
Mr. Norcross.
So a watch means, essentially, without the technical definition, which is not important, a watch means that the atmospheric conditions are conducive for it to happen, and there's indication that it could. A warning means, given the best information that we have, that we need to prepare. That doesn't mean it's absolutely going to happen or the worst is going to happen, but it means that the worst could happen, and therefore we have to prepare. So the watch is get ready, the warning is execute, or watch is take the first steps, and the warning is take the last steps.
And I want to add one thing, and Brian's dead on with that. The one thing that I want to make sure Floridians know is we are susceptible to tornadoes here in Florida. And one thing that you need to understand about a tornado warning versus a tornado watch, you need to really be paying attention, because when the tornado warning comes out, and Brian can correct me if I'm wrong here, but tornado warning means we have rotation. Or at
least we think we have rotation.
And that's when that warning is coming out and saying, hey, look, You need to, when the tornado warning, especially in Florida, comes out, as we've indicated here in Kings Point twice. I think we've had tornadoes in Kings Point twice. That is the time to be moving to the central portion of your home and taking cover immediately. Tornadoes in Florida are not these big tornadoes that you see out in the Midwest, where these things move very quickly. They're about 100 yards to maybe 300 yards wide, typically maximum, but they move at 45 to 60 miles an hour. And by the time the warning's coming out, it could be on top of you. So when we talk tornado, and I know this is about hurricane season, but tornadoes come in hurricanes as well. When you see the tornado warning, you need to be moving. That to Brian's point, you're activating. That is an action. You need to be moving to that central portion of your home. Cover your head. Get to the lowest point that you possibly can. That's time to act.
And just to emphasize that, because you had talked about Hurricane Ian, we all saw Hurricane Ian, Gulf Coast approaching storm on the other side of the state. Those first impacts were in Palm Beach County. The result of those impacts were 68 homes with major damage or were destroyed. 68 in Palm Beach County. So it wasn't one, it wasn't two, it was 68 residents in our community that had their life rocked because of that storm. So just think about that. And that was a storm that was coming in on the other side of the state. So it's very important. That's why I like to talk about those risks. And if tornadoes are our risk, we need to take that seriously.
So this is a flaw with the cone because the cone kind of takes everybody's attention. Okay, it's heading toward the Gulf, right? But the bottom line is that hurricanes are big, powerful machines, and they cover a very, very large area and influence the weather in a very large area. So if a hurricane is threatening or anywhere near Florida, we have the potential for bad weather everywhere in the vicinity of the hurricane, and everybody just needs to be conscious of that. One of the things we talk about storms, I went back to storms because I like to talk about storms. but I don't think that most people I talk to when the forecast says 4 to 7 feet of storm surge. So Sunday night with Hurricane Ian, 11 p.m., the National Hurricane Center put out a forecast of 4 to 7 feet of storm surge in Fort Myers Beach. That the storm hit Wednesday afternoon. So this is way in advance, right? This is 2.5 days, more than 2.5 days in advance. 4 to 7 feet, or I don't, and when they say 4 to 7 feet, I wish they would say up to 7 feet, because it's the 7 feet that counts. Who cares about the 4 feet, right? Well, what that means is if you go to the beach and where the high tide line is, and you can see it in the sand, right? If you stand on that high tide line and put your hand at 7 feet, that's what that forecast means. So you can kind of think about, okay, if that water is 7 feet here, where's that water going, right? Because water doesn't stop at the beach, right? Water keeps going. So that's what it means. So when it was measured at 15 feet, it was measured at 15 feet above that high tide line, right? 10 feet of storm surge went all the way across Miami Beach into Biscayne Bay, where the ocean went all the way across. So it's a lot of storm surge, right? And one of the challenges and communications challenges that came out of Hurricane Ian is that 7 feet of storm surge didn't have the impact that it should have. That forecast should have been, oh crap, that's bad. We can't be here with 7 feet of storm surge, and it ended up being 15 feet. But 7 feet should have been enough to motivate people, right? To motivate everybody involved there. So understanding what what it means is not really complicated, but I don't think it's well understood in general.
And we'll go back to that, but let's get the question. Another question.
Actually, we have a follow-up to that.
Okay.
Speaking of
We have a
storm
follow-up.
surge, how far from the coast should we be so as to not worry about storm surge?
Well, the issue is, are you near a river or a canal or something? Because if you think about what's happening there, the hurricane is pushing the water against the coast. It's going to go in every inlet. It's going to go up every river. In Southwest Florida, went up the Caloosahatchee River. And if you look at the zones for Miami Beach, for Miami with a Category 4 hurricane, it's way inland up to the airport. You know where the Miami airport is? It's way back there up the Miami River, and then there are flood control structures up there that kind of stop it. but it's up there and then out and flooding the areas around the river. In Broward, it's the New River and the other rivers here into Lake Worth and up the canals, up to the flood control structures in general, right? Right. So it's not a distance from the coast. It really depends on how close you are to waterways.
The one determining factor about that for the viewer that asked that question is look at your evacuation zone.
Yes, thank you.
That evacuation zone, because Mary and team, their floodplain manager, has looked at all of that. So they've accounted for what Bryan just talked about with that storm surge coming in, and it's going to go where the water is at, it's going to go where tributaries and other places are at. They've already done all of that, what's referred to as inundation study. They know where it's going to go. So the easiest way for you to ask yourself, do I need to leave or not? That's ultimately the question, is go to your local emergency management website, plug in your address, and it'll tell you if you're in an evacuation zone. If you're in an evacuation zone, figure out what that is, listen to Mary. When she calls for your letter, then that means you need to move.
Absolutely, because and we take into account those inland waterways when we were determining the evacuation zones. I can tell you in Palm Beach County, just in general, areas of Boca and areas in the northern part of the county in Jupiter, that evacuation zone extends in much further because of the inland waterways. So just definitely look at and see if you're in an evacuation zone by plugging in, and Kevin's right, you just have to plug in your address and it'll tell you.
Tommy, what happens if the storm surge hits the flood control?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because, and Brian's right, the water control structures are designed to hold water at different elevations, and usually the further inland, the higher it is. And what we're trying to do in a major rain event associated with a hurricane is open those gates to let water out of those areas that have higher water. The problem with the storm surge is as it comes in up to that structure, it can choke off the capacity of the structure to drain the areas upland of that. So you can wind up with not being able to discharge stormwater because of the existence of the downstream storm surge. And so it's just like dominoes falling up a hill. You can be far away from the area where the storm surge is actually affecting, but it could still influence and deteriorate your flood protection.
Do we have another question?
Well, this question has kind of been answered already right now, but I'll ask it anyways in case there's anything else you guys want to add. How does storm surge impact our canals and lake in my neighborhood? And what if that lake is not connected to a canal? If it's just one of these homeowner association lakes that was done to dig up, what's the impact there?
Yeah. Well, it's just another domino in what I described earlier. You know, if water can't get out of our canal because the storm surge is inhibiting that discharge, the same is true for the lake system in your neighborhood that's connected to our canal. So they all tend to then back up, and you know, had a tropical storm in 2000 down in Miami-Dade County where that happened in communities of Sweetwater, West Miami.
The no-name storm.
The no-name storm, right, exactly. Where the water couldn't get out of the canal, and it literally backed up because the runoff had no place to go except to remain in the communities and resulted in flooding.
So the lakes are connected to the canals sort of under the ground, right? I
Yes.
mean, it's all ground. The groundwater is everything finds its own level. So it's
Exactly.
just because the lake is not directly connected on the surface doesn't. They're still related in terms of their level.
There's a hydraulic connection. There's a pipe, some type of structure that allows water to go from the lake in your community underground into our canal. Then our canal can take it and discharge it from there. So.
I think what it's important, if you live in a community like that, you need to understand who's responsible for that control structure within your lake and your community. It's usually a management company. It could be your homeowners association board. So you need to understand that because we often talk about every disaster is local. And when we say that, it starts local. Every disaster starts in your home, then your community, then out to your municipality, the county government, the state government, and the federal government. But it starts in your own neighborhood. So, and some people get voted into these homeowners association boards and have no idea of their responsibility to their control structures. So I know our water management districts here are often educating those communities on their responsibilities within their communities.
Right, and that's one of the roles we fulfill. We're actually between, as I mentioned before, the South Florida Water Management District, where we discharge water to. We're between that system and your local residential community systems. So we work with the residential communities, the property managers, just as much as we interact with South Florida Water Management District. So, you know, that kind of communication, you making sure your system can handle the water, deliver it to us. We make sure our system can accept it, hand it over to South Florida Water Management District. All three entities have to be functioning together for it to really be successful.
All right. So, do I really need to purchase a generator in Palm Beach County? And while we're on the topic of the generators, what's the guidance on how much fuel you should have to power it? And at what point does all that fuel being bought to power the generator put more stress on the gasoline supply system?
I'm always a fan of generation. I personally, as an emergency management director in the state and even at the county level and local level, I had a full home house generator on my home. That's because a happy wife has a happy life, and you know, she knows that I'm not going to be around for a while, so she needs to have power. As far as the you know, there's whole house generators, there's portable generators. The big thing that we want people to realize, a lot of people cannot necessarily afford the whole house generator. They're looking at a portable generation system. So if they're doing that, follow the 20-20-20 rule, and that is you need to keep the generator 20 feet outside of any open door or window. It cannot be in your garage. That does not count as 20 feet. It's 20 feet outside the garage, 20 feet outside of a window. Second thing you need to do is 20-minute rule. That's the third or the second 20-minute rule. When you're refueling a portable generator, it must cool down for 20 minutes. If not, you could have a fire associated with the heat and whatnot that's coming off of that generator. You could have a flash spark. The last thing is spend $20 and go get a carbon monoxide detector for your home. So that's the 20-20-20 rule that we talk about in emergency management centered around generation. You know, at the end of the day, most of those generators are a gallon, 2 gallons, maybe 5 gallons at the most. I don't think you're going to necessarily drain the entire, you know, gas industry over those kind of quantities. But I'm personally at my home, I have an LP generator. I'm a gas-fed community. It plugs right into that, and you know, that's how I get the fuel for my generator.
I think one of the important things is to test that generator long before the storm is at our doorstep to make sure, you know, I think it was mentioned earlier, make sure your batteries are not corroded from last year's storm kit. Also make sure that your generators are in working order and that you've tested those long before you're ready to use them.
Yep. I'll tell you a system that I used that before Hurricane Andrew. I used this in Hurricane Andrew the one time when I renovated my house. It had central air in it, obviously, but I didn't. At that time, it was a really big deal to have a whole house generator. It's still kind of a big deal, but it was almost unheard of back then. So what I did is I put a window air conditioner, I built it into the wall of the bedroom behind some curtains, so you never, ever saw it. And I had the electrician run the cord out to the backyard. And so after Hurricane Andrew, when I came home, I got the generator out of the garage, I put it in the backyard, I started it up, and I had air conditioning just for the evening in the bedroom and closed the door to make the bedroom comfortable, and ran some lights and kind of lived in the bedroom, and then stopped the generator, turned off the air conditioning, and slept through the night. And then I started up again in the morning, and then I went to work. So the idea wasn't to try and live there with it, but it was a way to actually have air conditioning. I bought it as the 5,000 BTU air conditioner that would run on a relatively small generator, which was the common thing to do, many years ago. So some version of that could work even better now, because now we have so many things that don't use much electricity. The air conditioners are more efficient, the little refrigerators are more efficient, the lights are extremely efficient. You can run lights all the time.
And if you want to save an average of $210 on a generator, right now they're tax-free up to $300 or up to $3,000. So
Exactly.
generators up to $3,000 you can get tax-free right now.
Yeah. All right. Well, speaking of lighting, and this is some pushback here. I like my candles. What happens? All right.
I like candles too, not during a hurricane though. Not during a hurricane.
I think next time, Rick, we should have Bed Bath & Beyond be one of our sponsors. But anyways, but in all seriousness, what happens if your house batteries get wet? How do I get light? And maybe we should talk about fire safety here as well.
Well, let me tell you Hurricane Andrew's story. I had said one of the things I said, one of the smartest things I ever said in my life was, okay, friends, here's what I want you to do. Get a mattress off your bed. This is when it was obvious this was going to be this, extreme worst case situation for people. And a family got a mattress off the bed and they leaned it up against the dresser that had a candle on the dresser, and that set the mattress on fire. And they had to evacuate the house to the neighbor because they had a fire in the house. So even people that are careful, and they had done what I had told them to do. Back then we used candles because you couldn't, like I said, you couldn't use a flashlight for that long. I said, get a dinner plate and put the candle in the middle of a dinner plate. So it's, it's not gonna fall over, and like put wax down and so that it's in the middle of the dinner plate. So it's not gonna fall over on something. That's what they did, and then they had this happen. So unintentional things can happen with candles, and these days with LED lights, we just don't need candles.
Yeah, Ziploc bags, garbage bags, those are things that you can use on a day-to-day basis to keep things dry. Take advantage of the shelves in your house. Most houses, the cabinetry is at least 5 feet off the ground, if not higher. I mean, for you to live in your neighborhood and then get, again, if you're getting that much inundation, you're probably in an evacuation zone, so you should have evacuated to begin with. But again, put them up high, get them on a top shelf of a cabinet, put them in Ziploc bags if you're worried about stuff getting wet.
Let me say something about Ziploc bags, and because Ziploc bags are great, and plastic bags there are plastic bags, plastic sheets, and duct tape are one of the most important hurricane supplies. You can do an amazing amount of stuff with those things. But for your refrigerator, if a hurricane is coming, when a hurricane watch goes up, take Ziploc bags, fill them up 3/4, and put them in the freezer, and just cram the freezer every single place you can do with that Ziploc bag so that they turn to ice before the power might go out. You don't turn your refrigerator all the way down. My refrigerator guy says, please tell people not to do that. I have to replace so many compressors because people did that. In fact, what you really want to do is, if the power is starting to act weird, is kill the main so that you don't damage your electronics. But if you cram that, if you really have that frozen in there, that will keep your refrigerator colder longer, significantly longer, and once it melts, you'll have water to drink. Right? So I try and remind people to do this every time we get to within 48 to 72 hours, because it takes a while for all those plastic bags to freeze in the freezer, but it really does work.
All right, so while we're on that topic of fire safety, I assume that the barbecue in the garage is still a bad idea.
Bad idea.
All right, I just want to clear that out. All right, 3-part question here. How does climate change affect the size and intensity of hurricanes? Won't the high temperatures of the ocean and contribute more to the storm? And do we need higher hurricane classifications beyond Category 5?
Okay, so in order, so how does climate change affect hurricane? So the sea level is higher. So we start with the fact that the storm surge is going to be 8 inches to a foot higher than it would have been 100 years ago. We just start with that fact. You can probably tell me exactly what it is here.
No, you're right there.
Is that right? Yeah. Okay, so we start with that. The atmosphere, the Earth's atmosphere is warmer. That means it holds more water vapor. That means that all storms generate more rain. That's why we see more flooding now than we used to. 15%, 10%, something in that range, more rain. There's research that says that hurricanes will move more slowly in terms of their forward speed. Matter of fact, we're seeing that in weather systems in general. We tend to get these repetitive weather systems where the same weather happens over and over again. The overall pattern moves more slowly. Whether those two are related, I don't know, but the research says that the storms move more slowly. Because the water is warmer and the water provides the energy, hurricanes will be somewhat stronger. But that's not the big thing. The big thing is that we have hurricanes. You know, if the storms of the past, without any sort of amplification because of the warmer water, were to happen again, we would have a terrible hurricane situation. So yes, the additional energy in the water means that there is more water available for the storm and more energy for it to develop. That's true, and never been truer than this year with the off the charts warm water. And why exactly? I don't want to mix 100% what's happening in the ocean with climate change, because there's another factor that's going on that we don't completely understand, and that is in 2022 there was this big volcano, the Hunga Tonga volcano in Tonga Tonga. If you saw any of the pictures, they're incredible. It was under the ocean. It injected a tremendous amount of water vapor into the upper atmosphere, stratosphere, actually. And there's some indication that has warmed the Arctic significantly, and we see very, very warm areas in the Arctic now. And might that all be related, that is amplifying this situation? That's a possibility. But climate change is definitely affecting what hurricanes, but more or less on the margins. And not that it's not an existential threat to South Florida, it is, but more or less on the margins. The threat is from hurricanes here.
And the higher classification.
Oh, the higher
Well, I was
classification. Should there
gonna
be a
ask about
category
Cat
6?
6. Yeah,
Well,
should
I
there
mean,
be a
the
Cat 6?
categories are based on damage. And the category 5 is catastrophic damage. That's the definition of it. So, I mean, what's the next level beyond catastrophic damage? It doesn't hardly make any sense. And anybody that lived through Hurricane Andrew would say it can't be worse than that. You know, the difference between a 165 mile an hour or 185 mile an hour hurricane is, again, not anything that anybody put their finger on anyway.
Would a Category 6 make you evacuate over a Category 5? I don't think so.
Yeah,
It doesn't matter.
Right.
If it evacuate if Mary calls for the evacuation.
All right, and you kind of have all addressed this, but throw it out there one more time. What do you think is the most underrated hurricane danger you wish more people knew about or thought about?
I'll start with complacency. It's just flat out, it's not going to happen to me. It's not going to happen in my backyard. That is, in my opinion, by far the number one thing. You know, I could tell you the men and women on this panel are ready for this hurricane season. And I service 22 million people. Mary services 1.5 million people. Bryan talks to hundreds of millions of people every day. But we cannot physically go into your home and pack your bag for you and make your plan for you. You have got to do that yourself. And everybody has got to make a plan. The theme this year, and you know, Mary and I were just at a conference here a couple of weeks ago, right here in Palm Beach, and it was, if this is going to be, you know, the 04-05 season all over again, maybe the combined 04-05 season, again, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. You have got to be ready for year one. Let us worry about the bigger pictures, but you have got to be ready for year one. And for me, it's complacency in the people that will not take the opportunity to get prepared.
I think related to what Kevin said is a lack of understanding and appreciation for hurricane history. This is an extremely hurricane-prone place if we look at the time that people have lived here, let's say 120 years or so. Extremely hurricane-prone. And we've lived through, for those of us that have been here a long time in Florida, we lived through the 70s and 80s when there was not much hurricane activity. And the reason for that, we now know, was that the air was very polluted. If you remember, not in Florida, but if you went to New York in the 70s or the 80s, you go like this in the summertime and you have black all over your hand. You go to Los Angeles, your eyes would burn. Well, they had it all in Europe, and that pollution moved over Africa and affected storms and kind of squashed storms in the 70s and 80s. And we had so much development and so forth. And then we started having these hurricanes in the 90s. If you don't talk about Hurricane Andrew, but all the rest of them, the ones we really think of here, Francis and Wilma and Jean, were not, compared to the previous ones, where we had Category 4s in 1945, 1947, 1948, 1949, and 1950 hit South Florida. Category 4s, these Category 1, 2 events are just of a much lower scale. This is a spectacularly hurricane-prone place historically, and if people really appreciated that and just said, okay, I want to live in South Florida, I love it in South Florida, but I got to live with hurricanes, and they could really digest that reality, I think that we can live successfully with hurricanes, but we have to do it. We have to take action to do it. We can't just passively do it. And I think that would counteract complacency if we could get folks to understand how hurricane-prone Florida is.
All right, this question deals with insurance. I'll take a moment. We have our Palm Beach Post insurance writer, Ann Gegas, is back there. So what advice can you give people in terms of preparing for an insurance claim after a storm has passed?
So the one thing, there's a lot of rules and regulations that evolve around insurance, and I know just about enough to make me dangerous. So here's the one thing that I would tell you. In the state of Florida, there is a law that if you file a claim, an adjuster has to be at your house within 7 days. That has to happen. That is a law. So when that claim is filed, an adjuster needs to come out and they need to look at it. Now they may do that remotely. They may ask you to come around with a video camera, but that's got to happen. If you are not getting results out of your insurance company, then you need to call the CFO's office, the Chief Financial Officer. He has the business of Department of Insurance and Regulation underneath him. Mike, and I cannot ever pronounce his last name. I think it's Sawarski or something like that. He is the insurance commissioner. He takes care of those issues. Please call Mikey and call the CFO's office if you're having those issues. The one thing that I will tell you is we have a lot of people in the state of Florida that have moved from northeast, northwest, or north central, I would say, and they've moved down the 75 corridor and the 95 corridor. They have sold their home up in the northeast, north central. They've moved, they can come to Florida where there is a much better market. They sell their house up north for hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, and then they come down to Florida, they build a 1,800, 1,700 square foot home for cash, and then they do not insure their home. And folks, that is a mistake. That is 100% a mistake. Now, I know that the insurance market is volatile across the United States. It's not just here in the state of Florida. That's something mainstream media is going to tell you it's just a Florida problem. It is not. I've got friends in Louisiana, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Texas, California, you name it, they're having insurance issues. If you can't afford insurance, here's what I beg you to do. Look at other alternatives like a contents insurance. Me and my wife went around our home and we came up with almost $35,000 in furniture, clothing, pots and pans and things like that. And we went out and got a rider on top of our policy for the contents to make sure that we had enough to build our home back, not just structure, but also the stuff in it. If you're in a mobile home, an RV, and I believe the number is 20 years old, you cannot insure a mobile home beyond 20 years old. Fact check me on that, double check it, but I'm almost positive it's 20, maybe 25 years. But we have a lot of people across the state of Florida living in mobile manufactured homes or RVs that are more than 20, 25 years old. You can't insure them, but I bet you could get a contents policy on it, and at least now you can maybe recover a portion of the contents that are in your home. Renters. The number of people that do not have renter's insurance is a travesty. You need to have renter's insurance policy on the, again, contents and the things within your, inside your rental home. The average, and I'm going to give you a statistic that, again, is not a very well-known statistic. How many of you in this room think that today, if FEMA comes in, and because you don't have insurance, FEMA's going to come in and make you whole? All right, that'll never happen. By show of hands, how many of you think that the maximum grant for FEMA is more than $100,000? You qualify for everything they've got. Well, you're right. It's 2 veins, $37,000 a piece. Maximum grant, $84,000 is all you will ever get out of FEMA. We have less than 5% of the state of Florida that qualifies for maximum grant. The average grant paid out by FEMA in a storm is $5,000. There were 910,000 valid registrations for Hurricane Ian alone, and the average payout was $5,000. Your first line is insurance in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Renter's insurance, contents insurance, insurance on your home. Please make sure you're really focusing on those things. If you can't afford full-blown coverage on your home because it's just too expensive, look at other alternatives like a contents policy.
So I think that what the viewer was asking there is, and the good answer there is, before and after a storm, take a picture of everything. That just cuts through a lot of things. I mean everything. Like, you can take every document and be sure you send it to the cloud, the stuff before. Like, send it to iCloud or the Google Drive or something besides on your phone. You don't want to have your pictures on your phone. It just helps the insurance dilemma that you might face afterward. If you had to prove what it is, take pictures of receipts. If you have receipts for your TV and your sofa and everything, put it all in the cloud. These days, it's so relatively easy to preserve records that will facilitate doing the best you can with the insurance system. And what Kevin said is so true. Most renters don't realize how cheap renter's insurance is. It's really cheap. And it makes so much difference. I mean, we're talking about maybe a couple $100 a year. This isn't like having a home and trying to insure the home. For an average person, it's maybe a couple $100 a year. So I 100% echo that.
Oh, all right. We have 5 minutes because, so last comments, final comments.
You know, I just wanted to ask one question, and it's about messaging. You spent a lot of time in Fort Myers after Ian. What did you hear from the people?
Yeah.
What were they saying that didn't evacuate?
Yeah,
or-
so, one of my jobs is that, the governor cannot be down in these impacted areas in perpetuity. That's my job. And I think, that's one of the things the Florida Division of Emergency Management does, is we're going to be there with our counties from the start of it until it's done. So I was there for 77 days, and what I heard more than anything else is that this hurricane, Hurricane Ian wasn't like Charlie, and it wasn't like Irma. I survived Irma. Irma was a Cat 3-4 storm as it made impact into Cujo Key, and then Cat 3 as it made an impact into Marco Island, and it was not like that. And Bryan and I have said on panels together, we talked about this ad nauseum, but one of the things that we have to do from a messaging standpoint at the federal, local, state, meteorology level is we have to tell people the difference between storms. And that is Hurricane Irma, when it came through Cujo Key and then hit Marco Island, the right front side of that storm, which had typically most of the impact, went through the Florida Everglades, which is a nature-based solution to lay storm surge down. When you had Hurricane Irma come through, I'm sorry, not Irma, but when you had Hurricane Ian come up, that came straight in off the Gulf. The only thing that was in its path was a barrier island, which 100 years ago was a nature-based solution. Now it's completely populated. It is a city. There was nothing in its way. Back to what Bryan talked about earlier, that shelf, the shelf that we have on the East Coast versus the West Coast was not there. So that barrier island became the nature-based solution to lay storm surge down. And that's the biggest thing. And people did not, and then they said it was not Charlie. I believe the data says that Ian was 3 Charlies could have fit inside of Ian. So it was a huge, massive storm that felt effects from Key West all the way up to Tampa Bay and beyond, actually. So and again, Mary has said this, we treat every single storm as its own storm. What we're all going to do better in the future is tell people why this is different than Irma, why this is different than Ian, or why, again, in the future, why it's different than Ian, why it's different than Charlie, why was Hurricane Idalia different than Hurricane Hermine when it kind of had similar tracks, if you will. We've got to tell people that difference. And I believe that if people know the difference and they can actually compare, historically they're just going to do it. And Bryan's talked about that. We need to listen to the historical perspective of these hurricanes in the past. But then we also need to know what's different about them. And if we tell people what's different about them and tell them what the dangers are and why this is so much different, I think people will evacuate, and that's my hope.
Yeah. So we have to get out of the room. We're going to be kicked out. Any final thoughts? You guys have anything?
So the thing that I hope people take away from understanding hurricanes is that, as I said, this is a very hurricane-prone place. There have been a lot of hurricanes here. But for instance, Hurricane Ian did not have a huge impact on Cape Coral, which is the most populated city, by the way, in Southwest Florida, but a little bit of angle difference, and it would have. So the fact is that if you live in Florida, even if you have not historically, your location has not historically had a bad hurricane, it easily can with a little bit of difference in some historical hurricane, slightest angle difference, slightest size difference, something. Or you have to think of the entire state of Florida as hurricane prone, and the historic hurricanes had mangrove coasts and other sorts of storm surge barriers along the coast that we don't have today, because we ripped them all out and we put in concrete and we built houses and high-rises and whatnot. So the same storm would be worse today than it was back in the day in most cases, because we don't have a lot of those natural barriers. So bottom line, that living along the coast and living in Florida means living with hurricanes. And there's nothing to do but to be prepared.
And I would just close by saying, be prepared, have your plan, have your supply kit, continue to educate yourself on the tips and tricks and ways you can be better prepared, and then take this as an opportunity to go educate somebody else that isn't as educated as you, because we all have to recover together, so we all need to be prepared together. So I would take all those steps, everything you've heard tonight, share this information with somebody else tomorrow.
Couldn't agree more with Mary. I think that the fact that you've come out tonight to learn is tremendous, and I would just encourage each of you to take what you've learned here today and share that with your neighbors. It is a community event when we have a hurricane hit Florida, and it's all of us working together, all of us up here and our different organizations that can help get the communities back on its feet.
Yeah, just one quick thing regarding flooding. After the storm, it's enticing to get in your car and go out and drive in a street where the water's only 1 foot deep. A flooded street looks exactly like a flooded canal, and it's tragic how often people get confused and wander into a canal situation that's dangerous. So be very careful after a storm and a flooding situation.
Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, I've learned so much. I'm sorry. I've learned so much. Yep.
All right. So we've come to the end of our program. First of all, let me thank the panel. And please, can we give them some applause? And our moderator, and thank you for coming out tonight to listen to some of this, for some great information, and those folks who stuck with us in the live stream despite the brownout situation that we had. And again, to stick with us and learn some very important, get some very important information here. And again, the live stream has been recorded. It will be on palmbeachpost.com along with any of our other 16 newspaper websites around the state of Florida anytime you want to go watch and get a refresher. But thank you again for coming out.
Thank you.